For 3 months, the girl in cell 8147 never stopped shaking. The rumor traveled through Chiron 7 like a ghost story whispered between exhausted guards at the end of long shifts. Some said she had been exposed to a forbidden alien weapon. Others claimed she had witnessed something so terrible that her mind had simply broken. A few believed she was dangerous, that the trembling was merely an act designed to lure fools closer. Ethan Walker didn't believe any of them. The prison station hung alone in deep space, nearly 600 miles above the storm-covered world below. Outside the reinforced observation windows, rivers of blue lightning crawled across endless clouds, illuminating the darkness every few seconds with brief flashes of electric light. Inside, everything smelled faintly of recycled air, machine oil, and cold metal. Chiron 7 wasn't built for comfort. It was built to make people disappear. Ethan stepped through Security Gate C, his black duty boots echoing against the steel floor. The overhead lights hummed softly. Another 12-hour night shift. Another rotation spent guarding prisoners nobody talked about and reading reports nobody cared about. At 34, Ethan had already spent more years in uniform than he liked to admit. First the military, then planetary security. Now this. He adjusted the gray jacket of his station uniform and accepted the digital assignment tablet from the departing guard. Cell block 9 again? Ethan asked. The older guard nodded. Lucky you. Ethan glanced at the roster. Most of the names were familiar. Smugglers, data thieves, political agitators. Then he saw the last entry. Prisoner 8147. No species listed. No homeworld. No criminal classification. Just a number. Administrative error? Ethan asked. The older guard shrugged. Nobody asks questions about her. Then he left. That answer bothered Ethan more than it should have. Half an hour later, he found himself walking through the deepest corridor of cell block 9. The sounds of the prison faded behind him. The distant conversations. The maintenance drones. Even the ventilation system seemed quieter here. Only the occasional crackle of static from the storm. Outside disturbed the silence. Cell 8147 waited at the very end. Unlike the others, it had no viewing window. No identification panel. Only a reinforced door marked with restricted clearance symbols. Ethan keyed in his authorization. The door slid open with a hydraulic hiss. Cold air drifted into the hallway. For a moment, he thought the cell was empty. Then he saw her. She sat on the floor beneath a pale ceiling light. Tall, thin, motionless except for her hands. They trembled constantly. Not violently. Not dramatically. Just enough that the metal restraints attached to the wall emitted a faint rattling sound every few seconds. Click, click, click. Her silver hair fell forward, partially hiding her face. Her skin carried a faint blue tint unlike any human complexion. The chains weren't pulling her. She wasn't struggling. Yet the trembling never stopped. Ethan remained silent. She didn't look up. He checked the security monitor mounted beside the entrance. Heart rate elevated. Stress indicators elevated. No signs of aggression. No signs of escape attempts. No incidents reported for 91 days. 91 days. Ethan looked back toward her. Most prisoners adapted eventually. Anger faded. Fear faded. Hope faded. People changed. But this girl looked exactly like someone waiting for the next bad thing to happen. As though every second of every day, she expected a door to open and a nightmare to walk through it. Another faint rattle echoed through the room. Click, click, click. For the first time since arriving at Chiron 7, Ethan ignored protocol. Instead of turning around and leaving, he stepped inside the cell. The girl flinched instantly. Not much, just enough to notice. Her trembling became slightly worse. Ethan stopped. He didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't raise his voice. He simply stood there beneath the sterile light while blue lightning flashed beyond the station walls. Then, for the first time, the prisoner slowly lifted her head. Her violet eyes met his. Fear lived there. Not the fear of punishment. Not the fear of prison. Something deeper. Older. The kind of fear that remained long after the danger was gone. And in that moment, Ethan Walker realized something that would change both of their lives. The rumors were wrong. The girl wasn't shaking because she was dangerous. She was shaking because somewhere along the way, the universe had convinced her she would never be safe again. The image of those violet eyes stayed with Ethan long after he left the cell. During the next several hours, he completed routine inspections, reviewed maintenance reports, and monitored security feeds, but his attention kept drifting back to cell 8147. Something about the prisoner did not fit. Dangerous inmates made threats. Political prisoners made speeches. Smugglers negotiated. Everyone wanted something. She wanted nothing. She simply sat beneath that pale light while the chains softly rattled against the wall. Near midnight, another storm front rolled across the planet below. Blue flashes illuminated the observation deck every few seconds, casting long shadows through the station corridors. Ethan stood alone in the security office, scrolling through restricted personnel records. The screen reflected against his tired eyes as he searched for information on prisoner 8147. Nothing. No birthplace. No criminal history. No court record. No transfer authorization. Entire sections had been erased. That was impossible. Even the most classified prisoners left a digital trail. Yet someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to make this woman disappear from every official database. Ethan leaned back in his chair. The station's environmental system released a low mechanical hum overhead. He enlarged the file again. Prisoner 8147. Intake date, 91 days ago. Risk assessment, restricted. Special handling protocols, restricted. Species designation, restricted. He frowned. In his experience, the more information people tried to hide, the more important that information usually was. A sudden chime interrupted his thoughts. Shift change report. Ethan opened the message. Several guards had submitted complaints regarding the prisoner. Refusal to speak. Refusal to eat during observation periods. Excessive anxiety response. Psychological instability. One note caught his attention. Subject repeatedly requests that she not be transferred. Ethan read the sentence twice. Not released. Not rescued. Not transferred. The wording felt strange. He stood and grabbed a thermal beverage packet from the break station. A few minutes later, he found himself walking towards cell block 9 again. The corridor seemed even quieter than before. Most of the station had settled into its overnight rhythm. Maintenance drones drifted silently through access shafts. Security lights glowed dimly along the floor. Beyond the reinforced walls, thunder rolled through the atmosphere of the world below. When Ethan reached the cell, he paused outside the door. Then he keyed in his authorization. The door opened. The girl sat exactly where he had left her. Silver hair, blue skin, trembling hands. Click, click, click. The sound echoed softly through the room. This time, however, she noticed him immediately. Her shoulders stiffened. Her eyes lowered toward the floor. Ethan stepped inside carrying the insulated cup. Steam curled from the top. He placed it carefully several feet away from her and stepped back. The girl stared at it without moving. Neither of them spoke. Several seconds passed. Then a minute. Finally, she glanced toward him with obvious confusion. Ethan shrugged lightly. It is cold in here. His voice sounded unusually loud in the quiet room. She looked at the cup again, then back at him. Her lips parted slightly as if she wanted to ask a question but could not find the words. Ethan waited. Outside, another flash of blue lightning illuminated the station. The pale light reflected briefly in her violet eyes. Then something unexpected happened. The trembling never stopped, but for the first time since he had seen her, it became just a little less severe. Not much, just enough that the chains rattled less frequently. And somehow, that tiny change felt more significant than anything written inside her missing file. The next evening, Ethan returned to cell block 9, carrying more questions than answers. The storm outside had intensified. Sheets of blue electrical energy rolled across the atmosphere beneath the station, causing occasional flickers in the corridor lights. Most people found the storms unsettling. Ethan had always liked them. They reminded him that even in a galaxy filled with advanced technology, there were still things nobody could control. As he approached the restricted wing, he noticed something unusual. The security logs outside cell 8147 showed multiple access attempts during the previous 24 hours. None had been authorized. None had been explained. Ethan studied the timestamps. 3 different officers, 3 different departments, all trying to view a prisoner whose records supposedly did not exist. That alone was enough to raise alarms in his mind. He entered the cell. The air felt colder than the rest of the station. Lyra sat beneath the overhead light exactly as before. The insulated cup from the previous night rested near the wall. Empty. For some reason, that small detail made Ethan smile. When she noticed him, her shoulders tightened less than before. The trembling remained, but the panic behind it seemed quieter. Neither of them spoke immediately. The station hummed softly around them. Finally, Ethan sat on a maintenance crate near the door, far enough away to avoid threatening her. Close enough to talk. I looked at your file, he said. Her eyes immediately lowered. There is not much to see. Her voice was soft. It carried a faint musical quality unlike any language Ethan had ever heard. The sound surprised him. It was the first time he had heard her speak. That is the problem, Ethan replied. There is almost nothing there. Silence returned. Blue lightning flashed beyond the station walls. Lyra stared at the floor. Ethan studied her carefully. Every movement suggested caution. Every glance suggested calculation. Not manipulation. Survival. The behavior of someone who had learned that words could be dangerous. What are you afraid of? He finally asked. The question lingered between them. The trembling in her hands became slightly worse. Click, click, click. The chains responded with their familiar rhythm. For several seconds, she said nothing. Ethan assumed she would ignore him. Then she spoke so quietly he almost missed it. Please. Her voice cracked slightly. Do not let them take me back. Ethan frowned. Back where? Her eyes widened instantly. Regret crossed her face. She looked away. Whatever she had intended to say disappeared behind an invisible wall. Ethan recognized the expression. He had seen it in refugees after border conflicts, in disaster survivors, in people carrying memories too heavy to share. Nobody is taking you anywhere tonight, he said calmly. You are safe. The words felt simple, ordinary, yet the reaction they produced was anything but ordinary. Lyra froze, completely. For the first time since he had met her, even the trembling seemed to pause. Only for a second. Then it returned. But something had changed. Ethan could see it in her eyes. Not trust. Not yet. Something smaller. Something fragile. Hope. Suddenly, a security alert flashed across Ethan's wrist display. Unauthorized data request detected. Prisoner 8147. External source. Ethan glanced at the message. Someone else was searching for her file right now. Someone with high-level clearance. A cold feeling settled in his stomach. Whatever secret surrounded the young alien woman sitting before him was larger than a forgotten prisoner. Much larger. And for the first time, Ethan began to suspect that Cell 8147 was not designed to keep a dangerous person locked inside. It was designed to keep an important person hidden from the rest of the galaxy. After that conversation, Ethan could not shake the feeling that invisible eyes were watching Cell 8147. The station continued its routine around him, but the pattern had changed. Every security request involving the prisoner increased. Every restricted notification seemed connected to her. By the following evening, Chiron 7 felt less like a prison and more like the center of a secret nobody wanted exposed. Ethan sat alone in the security archive room while rows of servers emitted a steady mechanical hum. Blue status lights reflected across polished metal cabinets stretching nearly 50 feet down the corridor. He had spent 3 hours digging through maintenance records, personnel transfers, and forgotten station logs. Most of it was meaningless. Then he found something unusual. 92 days earlier, just before prisoner 8147 arrived, an entire laboratory section beneath cell block 9 had been reclassified. The location no longer appeared on public station maps. Access required command-level authorization. Even its power consumption records had been hidden. Ethan stared at the screen. Prisons did not hide laboratories. At least, not legitimate ones. A warning icon suddenly appeared. Access denied. File locked. The record vanished before he could save it. Someone was actively protecting whatever existed beneath the prison. The discovery followed him for the rest of his shift. Hours later, he returned to the restricted wing carrying another insulated cup filled with warm nutrient broth. The corridor lights flickered softly as a distant storm rolled across the planet below. Thunder vibrated through the station structure like a giant heartbeat. When the cell door opened, Lyra looked up immediately. Ethan noticed the difference. 3 nights ago, she avoided eye contact. Now she watched the door whenever she heard his footsteps. It was a small change, but an important one. He placed the cup near her as before. Thank you, she said quietly. The word surprised him. You are welcome. Silence settled between them. Not an uncomfortable silence. Just 2 people listening to the sounds of a prison drifting through steel walls. Somewhere far away, a maintenance drone passed overhead. Ventilation fans whispered through hidden ducts. Lightning flashed beyond the station hall. Lyra wrapped both hands around the warm container. The trembling continued, but the heat seemed to help. Ethan sat on the maintenance crate again. What happens if they transfer you? He asked. Her fingers immediately tightened around the cup. The color drained from her face. For several seconds, she did not answer. Then she looked toward the floor. Some places are worse than prisons. Ethan felt a chill despite the station's regulated temperature. Is that where they brought you from? Another flash of blue light illuminated the room. Lyra closed her eyes. Please. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. Do not ask about that place. Ethan nodded. He had no intention of forcing answers. Yet her reaction confirmed what he already suspected. Whatever haunted, her memories remained very real. Suddenly, the station speakers crackled overhead. Attention! Security personnel report to briefing stations. Priority directive update. The announcement echoed through the corridor before fading away. Ethan frowned. Emergency briefings during overnight rotations were rare. He stood. Lyra's eyes followed him. For the first time since he met her, genuine concern appeared on her face. Will you come back? She asked. Ethan paused near the door. The question caught him completely off guard. 3 days ago, she barely spoke. Now she was asking if he would return. Yes, he said. I will. Her shoulders relaxed slightly. The trembling remained, but something else appeared beside it. Trust. Small. Fragile. Still growing. As Ethan stepped into the corridor, he glanced once more toward the young alien woman sitting beneath the pale ceiling light. He did not know it yet, but the emergency briefing waiting for him would reveal a truth far more disturbing than any rumor whispered through Chiron 7. Somewhere beneath the prison, hidden below layers of classified security clearances, people were conducting activities that should not have existed on any civilized world. And somehow, Lyra was connected to all of it. The emergency briefing took place in Conference Room 12, a windowless chamber buried deep within the station. Ethan arrived alongside 24 other guards. Most looked annoyed at being pulled from their shifts. Others looked half asleep. The room smelled faintly of coffee and recycled air. At the front stood Commander Rourke, a stern woman whose gray uniform carried enough decorations to make conversation feel unnecessary. The moment the doors sealed shut, the overhead display activated. A station blueprint appeared above the table. Ethan immediately noticed something strange. The map included sections he had never seen before. Entire corridors existed beneath Cell Block 9. Hidden elevators, research chambers, restricted transit tunnels. The commander spoke without preamble. Effective immediately, access to Sublevel 7 is prohibited to all personnel without direct authorization. Murmurs spread through the room. Ethan remained silent. Sublevel 7. The same area hidden inside the archived records. Recent security concerns require additional precautions, Commander Rourke continued. Any unauthorized investigation into restricted operations will be considered a violation of station protocol. The wording caught Ethan's attention. Not unauthorized access. Unauthorized investigation. It sounded less like a warning and more like a threat. The briefing ended 10 minutes later. No questions were allowed. As personnel filtered from the room, Ethan lingered near the display. For a brief second before the system shut down, he saw one identifier attached to Sublevel 7. Behavioral Analysis Division. Then the screen went dark. Several hours later, he returned to Cell Block 9. The corridor lights glowed softly against polished steel walls. Outside the station, the storm had finally begun to weaken. Long rivers of blue light still crossed the atmosphere below, but the violent flashes had become less frequent. For the first time in days, the prison felt almost peaceful. Ethan entered the cell carrying a small portable heater he had borrowed from maintenance. The temperature inside was technically within regulation limits, but regulations did not account for fear. He placed the unit near the wall and activated it. Warm air drifted through the room. Lyra watched him quietly. You did not have to do that, she said. I know. Ethan sat down on the maintenance crate. The heater emitted a gentle hum. For several minutes, neither spoke. The silence felt different now, less like a barrier, more like a shared space. Lyra stared toward the floor. Her hands still trembled, though not as severely as before. The rattling chains sounded less frequent. Ethan noticed she was listening to the heater, listening to the simple mechanical sound as though it reassured her. Eventually she spoke. The storms are weaker tonight. Ethan nodded. Looks that way. A faint smile touched her lips. On my world, storms used to sing. Ethan looked over. Sing. The atmosphere created harmonics. You could hear them from miles away. Her eyes drifted somewhere far beyond the cell walls. When I was young, I would sit outside and listen for hours. It was the longest sentence she had spoken since they met. Ethan remained quiet, allowing the memory to breathe. After a moment, the smile faded. The trembling returned slightly stronger. I cannot remember the last time I heard them. Ethan understood then. The shaking was not caused by the prison alone. It came from loss. From everything she had been forced to leave behind. He looked at the chains connecting her to the wall. Cold metal. Standard restraints. Yet suddenly they seemed insignificant compared to the invisible weight she carried. Outside, another distant flash illuminated the station. The light reflected in Lyra's violet eyes. For the first time since arriving at Chiron 7, she did not look like a prisoner. She looked like someone trying very hard to remember who she used to be. 3 days passed before Ethan finally found the answer he had been searching for. It happened during the quietest hour of the station's artificial night cycle, when most personnel were either asleep or pretending to work. The security archive room stood empty except for the low hum of processors and the soft glow of thousands of data indicators. Ethan sat alone before a restricted terminal, staring at a file that should not have existed. He had not found it through official channels. He found it because somebody had made a mistake. A forgotten backup record. An incomplete transfer log buried beneath layers of encryption. Most people would have missed it. Ethan did not. The file contained only a single name. Lyra Vale. He read it twice. Then a third time. The moment the words appeared on the screen, several hidden records unlocked automatically. Images. Diplomatic briefings. Historical summaries. Ethan felt his pulse quicken. Lyra Vale was not a criminal. She was not a political dissident. She was not even a civilian caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. She belonged to the Valari dynasty, one of the oldest ruling families in the known galaxy. Her family had governed entire star systems for centuries. According to public records, however, every member of the dynasty had vanished years ago during a government transition. Officially, the bloodline no longer existed. Yet one member had survived. Lyra. Ethan leaned back slowly. Suddenly everything made sense. The erased files. The restricted access. The hidden laboratory beneath the prison. Somebody had gone to extraordinary lengths to ensure that nobody discovered who she truly was. A warning flashed across the monitor. Unauthorized access detected. Ethan immediately closed the file. The screen returned to normal. But it was already too late. He knew the truth now. Hours later, he walked toward cell block 9 carrying the weight of that discovery. The corridor seemed darker than usual. Every camera lens appeared more watchful. Every passing officer seemed suspicious. For the first time since arriving at Chiron 7, Ethan understood that he was no longer dealing with a simple prisoner. He entered the cell. Lyra sat beside the portable heater. The warm air moved strands of silver hair across her shoulders. She looked up as he arrived. "You seem troubled," she said quietly. Ethan almost laughed. She was the one sitting in chains, yet somehow she was worried about him. He sat down on the maintenance crate. For a long moment neither spoke. Finally, Ethan looked directly at her. Lyra. The reaction was immediate. Her eyes widened. The trembling intensified. Click, click, click. The chains rattled faster than they had in days. "How do you know that name?" she whispered. Ethan did not answer immediately. He simply held her gaze. In that moment she understood. Someone had finally discovered the truth. Fear crossed her face first. Then sadness. Then exhaustion. The exhaustion of a person who had spent too long hiding. She lowered her head. "I never wanted anyone else to know." Ethan spoke carefully. "You are not who they say you are." Silence filled the room. Beyond the station walls, distant lightning illuminated the clouds below. Lyra stared at the floor for several seconds before speaking again. "My family believed that people should be protected." Her voice trembled almost as much as her hands. Some powerful people disagreed. Ethan listened quietly. Everything changed after that. She stopped there. She did not need to explain further. The grief. Inside those few words said enough. Ethan looked at the chains attached to the wall, then at the frightened young woman sitting beside them. The entire galaxy believed her family was gone. The entire station believed she was a dangerous prisoner. Both were lies. And as the silence settled between them, Ethan realized something else. The people hiding her identity were becoming nervous. Very nervous. Because somewhere beyond the prison walls, forces were moving. And sooner or later, they would come looking for the last surviving heir of the Valari dynasty. The change came 2 nights later. Ethan noticed at the moment he stepped onto the station floor. Security personnel were moving faster than usual. Conversations stopped when certain officers entered a room. Restricted channels carried more encrypted traffic than normal. Something was happening. By the middle of his shift, confirmation arrived. A priority directive appeared on every command terminal inside Chiron 7. Prisoner relocation authorized. Execution of transfer order scheduled for 0000 hours. Ethan read the notice 3 times. His stomach tightened with every word. Destination classified. Authorization level Omega. No explanation. No appeal process. Just a transfer order. He already knew what it meant. Lyra had spent weeks fearing this exact moment. Not imprisonment. Not isolation. Transfer. The thing she feared most was finally happening. Ethan immediately attempted to access the supporting documents. Every request was denied. Every file had been sealed. The only information available was a countdown clock. 6 hours remaining. Outside the station, the storm season was ending. The atmosphere below glowed with scattered ribbons of blue light drifting across endless clouds. The view should have felt peaceful. Instead, it made the station seem more isolated than ever. 600 miles above the planet. Millions of miles from anyone who might help. Ethan found himself standing outside cell 8147 much earlier than usual. The door opened. Lyra looked up immediately. One glance at his face was enough. The color drained from hers. "It is happening," she whispered. Ethan stepped inside. He hated that she already knew. A transfer order was issued. The trembling returned harder than it had in days. Click, click, click. The chains rattled against the wall. Lyra lowered her head. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then she laughed softly. Not because anything was funny. Because she sounded tired. Very tired. "I knew they would come eventually." Ethan sat down on the crate. "Who?" She stared at the floor. "The people who needed my family to disappear." Silence filled the room. The heater hummed quietly nearby. Beyond the walls, distant thunder rolled through the atmosphere. Ethan studied her carefully. Weeks ago, he had seen a frightened prisoner. Now he saw something else. A young woman carrying the weight of an entire lost civilization. Someone who had spent months expecting the worst and somehow survived anyway. "You never told me what happened," he said gently. Lyra's violet eyes lifted toward him. "Because speaking about it makes it real." Ethan nodded. He understood that feeling. Some memories became heavier every time they were spoken aloud. She looked toward the small observation window near the ceiling. "My family believed power should protect people." Her voice remained soft. "Others believed power should protect itself." She swallowed. After that disagreement, many things changed. Ethan did not ask for details. He did not need them. The sadness in her expression told the story well enough. The countdown clock on his wrist display continued moving. 5 hours. 52 minutes. Time was running out. Lyra noticed him looking at it. A faint smile appeared on her face. "You should not worry about me." Ethan almost laughed. "You are worried about me again." Someone should be. For a brief moment, both smiled. The station suddenly felt less cold. Then the smile faded. Reality returned. The countdown continued. Outside, another pulse of blue light crossed the clouds below. Ethan looked at the chains attached to the wall, then at the frightened air sitting beside them. For the first time since arriving at Chiron 7, a dangerous thought entered his mind. Not how to protect her, not how to comfort her, how to stop the transfer from happening at all. The countdown reached 2 hours when Ethan finally made his decision. He stood alone inside a maintenance corridor overlooking the planet below. Blue streams of light drifted through the atmosphere like glowing rivers beneath the station. For several minutes, he simply watched them, listening to the distant hum of engines and life support systems. Every rule he had ever followed told him to walk away. Every order told him to do nothing. Yet every instinct told him that if he obeyed, Lyra would disappear into whatever hidden system had already stolen everything else from her. The answer became clear the moment he stopped thinking like a guard and started thinking like a human being. 30 minutes later, he entered cell block 9, carrying a small equipment case. The corridor was unusually quiet. Most personnel had already been reassigned to transfer preparations. The station itself seemed to be holding its breath. When the door opened, Lyra looked up immediately. One glance at Ethan's face told her something had changed. "What happened?" she asked softly. Ethan set the equipment case on the floor. "The transfer arrives in 90 minutes. The trembling in her hands intensified. Click, click, click. The chains answered with their familiar rhythm. Ethan knelt beside the restraint control panel mounted to the wall. For several seconds, he simply stared at it. Years of training, years of regulations, years of discipline, all resting on a single decision. Behind him, Lyra's voice barely rose above a whisper. "You should leave." Ethan smiled faintly. "You keep saying that. Because this is not your fight." He looked back at her. "Maybe it became my fight the day I walked into this room." Silence followed. The heater hummed quietly. The storm outside continued fading into the distance. Then Ethan opened the equipment case. Lyra's eyes widened. Inside rested a portable override device, authorized for emergency restraint failures. Not for this. Never for this. Ethan, his fingers moved across the controls. A series of status lights flashed green. The restraint system emitted a soft electronic tone. You trusted me, he said. That matters. Another tone sounded. The first. Restraint unlocked with a metallic click. Lyra froze, completely still. She stared at the released cuff around her wrist as if she could not believe it was real. Ethan continued entering commands. One by one, the remaining locks disengaged. Soft clicks echoed through the room. No alarms. No sirens. Just silence. For the first time in months, no chain connected her to the wall. Lyra remained motionless. Ethan stood slowly. Come on. She looked at him with disbelief. Why? The question stopped him. Not because he lacked an answer. Because it seemed impossible that nobody had given her one before. Because you deserve the chance to choose your own future. Her eyes filled with emotion she could not hide. Outside the cell, warning lights suddenly illuminated the corridor. Transfer personnel had arrived earlier than expected. Ethan checked the clock. 72 minutes remaining. We need to move. Lyra rose unsteadily to her feet. Months of confinement made the movement difficult, but she remained standing. Together they stepped into the corridor. The station seemed different now. Larger. Stranger. Every hallway carried uncertainty. Every corner carried risk. Yet as they began moving through the maze of steel corridors, Ethan noticed something remarkable. The trembling had not disappeared completely, but it was weaker. Much weaker. For the first time since he met her, Lyra was walking forward under her own power. And somewhere deep inside the station, hidden systems were beginning to realize that the person they had spent months trying to keep hidden was no longer waiting quietly behind a locked door. The station alarms finally began sounding as Ethan and Lyra reached an observation transit corridor overlooking the planet below. Red status lights pulsed across the polished walls. Automated announcements echoed through the structure, directing personnel toward security checkpoints. Yet despite the growing urgency around them, the corridor itself remained strangely quiet. Their footsteps carried softly across the metal floor. Ethan glanced at the countdown on his wrist display. Less than 40 minutes remained before the scheduled transfer. Somewhere behind them, people were searching. Somewhere ahead, uncertainty waited. Lyra walked beside him without speaking. The change was impossible to ignore. Days earlier, she had barely lifted her eyes from the floor. Now she moved with growing confidence, as though every step helped her remember a version of herself she thought had been lost forever. They eventually reached a small maintenance platform positioned near the outer hull. Through the massive reinforced viewport, the stars stretched endlessly across the darkness. The storm-covered world below glowed with ribbons of fading blue light. For a moment, neither spoke. They simply stood together watching the galaxy drift beyond the glass. Then a new sound filled the corridor. A communication alert. Ethan's terminal activated automatically. An incoming transmission appeared on the screen. Unknown source. High-priority diplomatic channel. Before he could react, the display expanded. A symbol emerged. Silver wings surrounding a field of stars. Lyra stopped breathing for a second. Her violet eyes widened. That crest, Ethan said quietly. It belongs to my family, she whispered. The transmission stabilized. A calm voice filled the corridor. If Lyra Vale can hear this message, know that loyal allies are approaching your location. Ethan stared at the screen. The voice continued. We searched for years. We never stopped. Lyra's hands rose slowly toward her mouth. Tears filled her eyes. Not tears of fear. Relief. The kind that arrives after carrying loneliness for far too long. Outside the viewport, distant lights suddenly appeared among the stars. At first, Ethan thought they were reflections. Then more appeared. And more. Small points of silver emerging from the darkness. Ships. An entire formation. They did not arrive dramatically. They arrived patiently. Purposefully. Like people finally coming home. The transmission continued. Your family believed that dignity mattered. That kindness mattered. Those ideals survived. Lyra closed her eyes. Ethan looked toward her hands. For several seconds he simply stared. Then he noticed something. They were still. Completely still. No trembling. No rattling chains. No fear-driven motion. The shaking that had followed her through every moment since he met her was gone. Lyra seemed to notice it at the same time. She looked down at her hands and froze. Then she laughed softly through her tears. A genuine laugh. The first Ethan had ever heard. Outside the station, the arriving ships reflected starlight across the viewport. Inside the corridor, silence settled between them. Comfortable silence. Meaningful silence. Eventually Lyra turned toward him. You saw a person when everyone else saw a prisoner. Ethan smiled. Seemed like the right thing to do. She looked toward the stars again. You changed everything. He wanted to argue. Wanted to tell her that she had done the difficult part herself. But the words never came. Instead they stood side by side watching the distant ships approach. The alarms continued somewhere far behind them. The station continued spinning through space. The galaxy continued moving forward. Yet for one quiet moment, none of that mattered. Because the young woman who had once sat alone beneath a pale prison light was finally free. Not because the chains were gone. Not because help had arrived. But because someone had reminded her of a truth she had almost forgotten. Her worth had never belonged to the people who tried to take it away. And reflected in the glass before her, among the stars and distant worlds, she finally looked like herself again.